19th, 2019 Board of Supervisors meeting. Could we all please stand to recite the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For anyone who's new and is not unaware of the fact that the agenda is at the back of the room, it's against the law if you'd like to have one. A couple of just initial announcements. We need you to silence your cell phones, including everybody at the dais, that would be me. And just to be noted that you may be audio or video recorded during this meeting. So we'll go ahead and start with the supervisor's initial use hearing.
I'm going to pass out pre-marked exhibits for the board. You have some of these already. Thank you.
Did you like them?
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to leave this for Don. Okay, so this is a conditional use hearing for Franklin Bioscience Penn, LLC, doing business as Beyond Hello. They are the equitable owner of property at 1261 Westchester Pike. It's identified as Chester County Tax Parcel 52-6A-29. The property is improved with the building that was formerly used as the BB&T branch bank building. Applicant is seeking conditional use approval pursuant to Section 84-32M10 of the West Goshen Township Zoning Ordinance to use the property as a medical marijuana dispensary. Some board exhibits I'd like to introduce. The first is the conditional use application. This came with a cover letter from the applicant's counsel, John Jaros. It was dated January 25th, 2019, and it has some attachments to that. The second exhibit, tonight's hearing had to be advertised in the Daily Local News. It was advertised on February 4th and February 11th, 2019. The third exhibit is affidavit of posting. William Webb, the zoning officer, posted the property on February 5th, 2019, and he also indicates in his affidavit that he mailed hearing notices to all property owners within 1,000 feet of the subject property. He also did that on February 5th, 2019. And there are photographs indicating the location of the postings. The fourth exhibit is minutes. These are draft minutes at this point in time. Your Township Planning Commission reviewed this application last week and discussed it and then recommended that the board approve the application. So members of the audience, this is a conditional use is a type of zoning approval that only the Board of Supervisors can issue. They've made a legislative determination when they drafted the zoning ordinance or when the ordinance was put in effect that this particular use was appropriate in this zoning district, provided that a public hearing process was held and the applicant met the burden of proving both the objective and subjective criteria for a medical marijuana use. I want to say a little bit about this particular use because unlike most other uses in the zoning ordinance, this use is something the township did not have a lot of discretion with respect because of the state law that was passed. The Medical Marijuana Act basically gave guidance to municipalities to say that you have to allow medical marijuana dispensaries or treat them the same way that you would treat similar commercial uses. So when the state law was passed, we took a look at the West Goshen zoning ordinance, and we felt that the most similar use would be a pharmacy or a retail store that would sell pharmaceutical or prescription drugs. So we looked at the locations where pharmacies were permitted in the zoning ordinance, and we basically added medical marijuana dispensary as a defined use as it's defined under the state law, and we allowed them in the same location and through the same process. And we believe by doing it that way, we were following the state law. So again, I feel that the board's hands were somewhat tied This is not something that we can, under Pennsylvania zoning law, you cannot prohibit uses. You have to have a district for basically any legitimate land use. And this is a legitimate land use as recognized by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So be that as it may, that's why we're here. I'm going to open it to see if there's anybody in the audience that wishes to be recognized as a party. To be recognized as a party, you have to own or lease property in close proximity to the applicant's property, and you have to believe that you would be affected or aggrieved by a decision of the Board of Supervisors, and therefore would want the opportunity to participate in the hearing, to cross-examine the witnesses, to bring your own witnesses, and then also to appeal any decision that's rendered by the board. So the first step of that is that you have to own or lease property in close proximity to 1261 Westchester Pike. I'm going to open it now to see if anybody meets those prerequisites and wishes to be recognized as a party. The applicant's counsel, John Jaros, will have an opportunity to object to any person's request for party status, and then I will give guidance to the board on whether I think that that particular individual or entity meets the legal burden for standing. So let's open it up right now and see if anybody in the audience, please stand, state your name and address. Ms. Ford?
Margie Swart, 1519 Lakes Drive.
And Ms. Ford, how far away is your property from the applicant's property?
Oh, it's far across the township that you can probably get.
And I would tell you, it's obviously Mr. Jaros' position, but there are case law that says that 0.8 of a mile is too far away to be granted party standing. So my recommendation would be that where she lives is too far away from the subject property to be granted standing.
Ms. Kim, excuse me, I do have it in writing, and if you'd like to see my reasons behind it, I do cite for section 908.3 of the Municipality Planning Code, and because it is a conditional use hearing and there are special conditions, the reason why it is a conditional use hearing is because, like a landfill or medicinal marijuana uses, it affects the health, safety, and welfare of the entire community.
That may be, Ms. Ford, but you still have to have, I don't need that. You still have to have legal standing to be recognized as a party. And a prerequisite to legal standing and a conditional use hearing is that you own or lease property in close proximity to the applicant's property. Your statements that you will make, they will be heard by the board. You will have an opportunity, as anybody who's in the audience, even if you're not recognized as a party, it is a public hearing, and you will have the opportunity to present what you would like to present to the board. You will not have the opportunity to cross-examine the applicant's witnesses or call your own witnesses or appeal the decision. So I think I don't think she meets the legal standard. I have done, in 24 years of practicing municipal law, many, many times I've done conditional use hearings. I've read many, many of the cases on standing. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Jaros because it is his case on this.
Good evening. John Jaros representing the applicant, and I would agree 100% with Ms. Camp's statements. The MPC may have certain statements or holdings with respect to a party, but the case law that has derived over the years has interpreted that, essentially says that you have to be within close proximity. And again, I would agree with Ms. Camp and her earlier statements, and because of those reasons would object to Ms. Swart as becoming a party to the application.
So is the board comfortable with denying Ms. Swart legal standing?
I am.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right. Is it?
May I ask your respect in allowing me more than 3 minutes when it comes time to making public comment?
That's
That
up
will
to
be at
you.
the jurisdiction of me.
Okay, I would like to state for the record that I attended the Planning Commission meeting.
You can do that in the next time. Right now, we're talking about the hearing.
I was not allowed to ask questions at the meeting on Tuesday night. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Okay, next gentleman, could you please state your name?
Yeah, my name is Robert John Campanelli. I'm from 1329 Park Avenue, which is East Goshen, but I'm so close to that intersection. I feel I have to, disagree with the location of a medical marijuana unit there.
Sir, can you spell your name? I'm sorry, both for the court reporter as well as me. Go slowly.
Its last name is Campanelli, Campanile.
Okay, and you're at 1329 Park Avenue. Do you know how close that is to the applicant's property in terms of feet,
Well,
linear feet?
I can see the property. I mean, I don't know how many feet, I didn't measure, but I got a letter in the mail.
Okay, so you're within 1,000 feet. So is
Probably about a quarter of a mile.
Okay, so based on the case law, I do believe that somebody within 1,000 feet would have sufficient proximity to the applicant's property to be granted party status. So Mr. Campanelli, I'm going to let Mr. Joes see if he objects to that.
Mr. Campanelli, is there a particular issue that you're taking objection to with regard to the proposed use?
Well, I just find that the visible construct of a building in such a strategic location where there's school down the street, elementary school up there, and that little strip mall there sometimes has been hit with crime. So you're going to get some knuckleheads from the city somewhere. Man, they don't know it's going to be anything, that's going to be, but they're a little game. So we're going to attract a lot of crime. And marijuana, if it helps people, let it be done in a medical surrounding with a campus, high security. There's no security there. At night, that place is empty. I've been to the stores up and down that little strip mall there. They kicked in the glass at the Sean Palace, and they broke in different stores over the last few years. So crime is coming out from where, I don't want to say the city, it's coming up from Coatesville, from the country. And I think marijuana is fine if it can be really confined. Maybe like around a medical community where there's 24-hour security guards and they can monitor parking lots and all that.
Well, let me ask you this. You haven't heard the testimony in support of the application, correct?
This is my first day here.
Right, but you haven't heard the testimony in support of the application, correct?
I don't know
what he means is you haven't heard, let me say something. The state law has very stringent regulations. And I think the applicant's going to go into some of that in their testimony. They're going to explain the security measures that they'll have in place. So I think what we should do, my suggestion to the board, is to grant him party status and let him listen and hear the testimony and ask questions. Okay? So you'll be able to participate.
Well, I'm just also...
So we're going to get to your objections later. Okay. Let's have you sit down for now.
And for the record, if I could just reserve my objection, if I have one, to the end of the hearing for the gentleman.
Okay. Ma'am, your name? Okay.
My name is Dawn Willard, and I am the owner of Westchester Lawn and Garden. I live at 1301 Park Avenue.
And how close is that?
100 feet.
100 feet. Okay. Mr. Jarrett, any objection?
Again, I'd like to reserve making any objection with regard to Ms. Willard or Mr. Campanelli at the end of the hearing to hear specifically what their objections are to the proposed use.
Okay. Well, again, I would guide the board that I think that they own property in close proximity enough that they should be able to participate in the hearing as parties. If at the end you want to ask them further questions, they can.
Comment to myself as
Ma'am, we're not going to take comment on the application right now. All we're doing, we have to do this in a very orderly fashion. So right now we're just recognizing parties. Okay? So you have been recognized for right now as a party, and you will be given an opportunity to ask the witnesses questions and also make your own personal statements. Okay? Everything's being transcribed, so we have to conduct this as if it's a court proceeding. There are property interests at stake. There are legal rights at stake. So I want to make sure that this is orderly done. Is there anybody else in the audience that wishes to be recognized as a party? Sir, can you state your name?
Yes, Robert Wiggins.
Mr. Wiggins, what property do you own? What is the address?
1301 Westchester Pike.
And that's how close to the property in question?
10 feet.
Okay. Just getting it on the record. I know where it is. I'm just making sure the court reporter and anybody reading the transcript does. I would suggest that Mr. Wiggins also owns property in close proximity and should be recognized as a party.
Same reservation.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Wiggins. Do you want to move up, Mr. Wiggins? It might be helpful to...
I'm in trouble.
Okay. Anybody else wishes to be recognized as a party? Okay, so let's do this at this point. Mr. Jarrett, do you have any objection to admission of board exhibits 1 through 4?
No objection.
Okay, and I will turn the case over to you.
Thank you. Good evening again, ladies and gentlemen. John Jarrett on behalf of the applicant representing Franklin Bioscience Penn LLC. Mr. Daly is handing up some previously marked exhibits by the applicant. My client is the lessee of property located at 1261 Westchester Pike in the township. The subject property comprises approximately 1 acre and is the former site of the BB&T Bank facility. The property is located in the C5 General Highway Commercial Zoning District of the township. My client is proposing a medical marijuana dispensary at this location, which is a defined term in the zoning ordinance and permitted by conditional use under Article 10, Section 8432, M10 of the Township Zoning Ordinance. My client is currently licensed by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to operate a medical marijuana dispensary, and in fact operates 2 such facilities, one in Center City, Philadelphia at 1206 Sansom Street, and the other at 2412 Durham Road in Bristol, Bucks County. My client filed a conditional use application with the township and appeared before the Township Planning Commission on February 12th and received a favorable recommendation from the Planning Commission on the conditional use application. I'm here this evening with Justin Carey, Blythe Hustis, representing the applicant, and our civil engineer, Chris Daly from DL Howe and Associates. And one correction, I believe Ms. Swartz said earlier that she was not permitted to ask questions. In fact, she did ask questions of us at the Planning Commission meeting, and we did in fact respond. So having said that, I would perhaps ask that all 3 witnesses be sworn at the same time, Ms. Camp, if that's...
Up to the court reporter, that's fine by me. Just please come forward and maybe give your cards to the court reporter so he has the correct spelling of your name. Names, plural. And you'll all have to stand and go closer to the court reporter. Yes, please hand them to him. Yeah, that's fine.
You'll just stand right there, raise your right hand. You swear the testimony about to provide will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
With the board's permission, I'd like to have the bulk of the testimony come in through Ms. Hustis, representing the applicant. You will hear she is President Director of Retail Operations. Mr. Carey, Mr. Justin Carey, is more of a global perspective, if you will, but I wanted Mr. Carey here this evening to answer any questions by the supervisors that Ms. Hustis may not be able to answer. And lastly, I think we'll be pretty brief with Mr. Daly on the civil engineering aspect. So Ms. Hustis, perhaps if you come up here and stand at the mic, and I'll try and keep my voice up with the questions. Can you state your name and current business address?
Yes, my name is Blythe Hustis, and we currently have businesses operating on 2412 Durham Road in Bristol, Bucks County, and 1206 Sansom Street in Philadelphia.
And is there a business address for Franklin Bioscience Penn LLC in particular?
Currently, we're using our P.O. Box in Abington, Pennsylvania.
And what is that P.O. Box?
P.O. Box 718, Abington, Pennsylvania, 19001.
And are you employed, and if so, by whom?
I am by Franklin Bioscience.
And are we referring to Franklin Bioscience Penn LLC as the applicant here this evening?
Yes.
And can we refer to them as Franklin? Can we abbreviate that this
Yes.
evening? Okay. And what is your position with that company?
I'm President and Director of Retail Operations.
Is Franklin a dispensary that dispenses marijuana for medical use for registered patients in Pennsylvania?
Yes, we are.
Does Franklin operate any other medical marijuana dispensaries within the Commonwealth? I think you mentioned them, one in Center City and one in Bucks County.
That's correct. We opened in Center City this past January and our Bristol, Bucks County in May of 2018.
Is Franklin the holder of a permit issued by the Department of Health of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for dispensing medical marijuana to registered patients?
Yes.
Have we included a copy of that current permit entitling Franklin to conduct medical marijuana dispensing in our packet of exhibits?
Yes, we have.
And did we mark that as applicant's exhibit 83?
Yes, I believe we did.
Here.
I'm so sorry.
There you go.
I'll grab another one.
Got it?
Yep, I'll solve that. Thank you. Yes,
And Act 16 is the Pennsylvania legislation that was passed in 2016 to enable these types of facilities to be permitted and exist. Is that correct?
yes, that's correct.
Can you please explain to the supervisors how Act 16 permits medical marijuana to be dispensed to registered patients in the county?
Yes. In 2016, the Commonwealth passed a law allowing for permits to be issued to qualified applicants to operate state licensed medical marijuana dispensaries. So we are able to check in registered patients and caregivers as long as they are providing the proper identification. We check them into our facility. There's immense amounts of security, which I know we'll go through. And as long as they are a licensed caregiver or patient, we are able to bring them into our secured medicine room and provide them with product.
Now, Blythe, how do medical professionals on site dispense product to the registered patients, if you will? How does the normal operation?
Yeah, so when you first enter our facility, we do have security guards on site. You are asked to go to the check-in area, which is a window, and we've got a waiting room which is secured. At that time, you're presenting your medical marijuana card or your caregiver card and a state-issued valid identification. At that time, we scan in those items, we make copies of those items. Patients or caregivers have to fill out a new patient registration form, so we're capturing their information. We scan their card into a state-regulated site. With the scanning of that card, we're able to see whether or not they have an active caregiver or patient card. Once we have them checked into our facility, we then escort them back to a limited access area that we refer to as our medicine room, at which time you will speak with either one of our patient consultants or one of our medical professionals on staff. We have full-time medical professionals on staff during all hours of operations. We right now have 5 registered pharmacists in our existing businesses, so they're able to conduct private consultations with any patients and caregivers who have questions regarding products, any type of interactions, and ultimately how they're going to find a product that will treat their ailment.
Now, the ailments that you just spoke of, is any ailment treated by medical marijuana, or is there a list within Act 16 as to what those particular ailments have to be?
There is a list. When the program was first approved, there were 17 qualifying conditions. Since that time, we now have 21 qualifying conditions. So a patient has to have one of those conditions to even receive one of their cards. In order to receive a card, they have to meet with one of the registered medical professionals that the state recognizes authorized to write recommendations.
So is it true that you have to be a registered physician in order to prescribe medical marijuana? Not every physician can prescribe it. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
I think we'll get into this in a little more detail in a moment, but as far as anticipated number of patients based on your other 2 operations, what would you anticipate number of patients per hour at this facility?
We're thinking anywhere from 3 to 5 patients an hour.
And you mentioned security. We'll get into that in a moment. So let me start with this. So Franklin, doing businesses beyond below, is a special purpose entity that has entered into a lease agreement with the property owner at 1261 Westchester Pike in the township, correct?
Correct.
And we have provided the supervisors a copy of the first and last page of that lease agreement under our packet of exhibits as applicant's exhibit A1, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And is that property the former BB&T bank facility that has been vacant for some time?
Yes, it is.
And is it Franklin's intent to refurbish the building for the medical marijuana dispensary?
Yes, it is.
And have we included in our packet of exhibits a floor plan depicting your intended improvements within the building envelope to implement the use?
If you could confirm Exhibit 8.
A8, yes.
Yes.
I'd ask you to focus on that Exhibit A8 for a moment, and please explain to the supervisors how the facility will lay out within the building.
Sure, so everybody up here has a colored copy, which will make it easy for you to understand where you gain entry to our facility. We are not relocating the existing entrance, so you would come into a secured vestibule, then you go into a waiting room, and the waiting room has a check-in counter, similar to a doctor's office when you're visiting. In the check-in area in the waiting room is where we have a guard present, and at that time we're confirming that the patron has the required card and state-issued ID or government-issued ID that's valid in order to actually be seen by one of our patient consultants or medical professionals.
Blythe, up on the screen, Mr. Craig has been kind enough to put up a copy of A8, and there are color connotations, if you will. Using those, what aspects or portions of the building would be available for patients?
Only the blue and green.
Okay.
So again, everything is a secured access, so they can't come into the waiting room and then go right back onto the med room or the sales floor. They have to actually be allowed in from the waiting room to that green sales area.
Okay. And to the left-hand portion of the document or floor plan, is it fair to say that that area would be the former drive-through facility of the bank?
Yes.
And could you explain your intent with regard to closing that off and what that portion of the building would be?
Sure. So the Department of Health requires that we have the ability to secured deliveries. So this is how we would accommodate that need. A unmarked delivery vehicle pulls into that space, and then a garage door or a door of sorts would drop down, so the delivery vehicle is completely out of sight. And that's actually, it's not required by the Department of Health that a vehicle is completely out of sight like that. It's an extra element of precaution that we like to take.
So essentially a delivery vehicle in the form of a truck, I assume, a small truck?
Yeah, it's generally a small cargo van.
Okay. Would pull into that area, and then doors would close, and the product would be offloaded in a secure manner.
That's correct. In addition to that, the Department of Health requires that all vehicles have 2 people in the vehicle. One person is allowed to leave the vehicle to help bring the product into our secured space, and another agent is required to stay with the vehicle.
Will security be implemented, and to the extent you can state on a public record without violating any protocol, describe what that security would consist of?
Sure. So I mentioned that we have security guards on site. So in addition to the security guards, we have a number of additional security items that we implement at all of our locations. We have glass breaks on any points that would have glass and potentially be broken or kicked in. We have motion detectors. We have, I believe this location overlay has about 30 cameras. So there's not an inch of the location that we can't see on camera. We're required to keep 2 years worth of camera footage on file, so we have the ability to do playbacks at any time, capture any type of still or moving videos from previous dates. We have static and mobile panic buttons. We have silent and audible duress alarms. We have the needed, fire alarms and sprinkler alarms as well. But security is extremely important to us. We have steel in the walls in certain areas as well to add an extra element of security.
And do you typically coordinate with local law enforcement with security?
Absolutely. That's incredibly important to us to get the feedback of the communities and the local law enforcement. We understand they know the area best. They know what historically has occurred in the area, and they're also able to give us really valuable feedback on what we could do to make our locations more secure. So it is a common practice for us to make sure that we're consulting with these individuals. In addition to that, I mean, we like them to come into the space, to know the space. We feel in the event that that something were to happen, if they know the layout in advance, it's certainly beneficial.
Now, are there any state regulatory requirements with regard to limiting factors or distances for those types of facilities, or for these types of facilities?
You mean the 1,000? Yeah, we have to be 1,000 feet from a school or a daycare.
And that's pursuant to the Pennsylvania Code Title 28, correct?
That's correct.
And did we include in our list of previously marked exhibits a surveyor's report under A4 that essentially states we comply with that 1,000-foot separation distance from a public, private, or parochial school or daycare center?
Yes, we did.
And we also included in our packet of exhibits, did we not, some artists' renderings with regard to the exterior of the facility? And I think Mr. Craig, it might be the next.
A9.
That's A9 in our packet of exhibits. Could you just describe for the record what that depicts?
Of course. So that's the ramp, our ADA compliant ramp for wheelchairs in the entrance to our facility. Beyond Hello is our DBA, so we operate our dispensaries under that name. I like to draw attention to the fact that it's not green crosses, any type of cannabis notion whatsoever. Beyond Hello is really part of what our mission and intent is. It's to go beyond a simple transaction with our patients and to really start having honest conversations with patients, the community, and our caregivers about how cannabis can benefit them.
Understated might be a fair description?
Yes,
And that would be the portion of the building that faces Ellis Lane, correct?
that is.
And then I believe A10, Mr. Craig? What does A10 depict?
That is the secured delivery.
And would that be fair to say that that's slightly elevated from the Westchester Pike side of the building?
I believe it is, yes.
And that depicts what you intend to do with the existing drive-through portion of the building if the application is approved?
That's correct.
A11, Mr. Craig? What does A11 depict?
This is a picture of our waiting room in our Center City, Philadelphia location.
I assume you would try and achieve something to that effect in this building?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. And A12, Mr. Craig? And A12 depicts what?
That's a rendering of our medicine room.
And that is at which facility?
That's at 1206 Sansom Street in Center City, Philadelphia.
And again, I assume it would be your intent to try and achieve something to that effect as well in this building if the application is approved?
Yes, that's correct.
Those are all the questions I have for you at this time, Blythe. Is there anything that you felt we have not informed the supervisors about with respect to the proposed use of?
No, I think we covered it. Thank you.
Those are all the questions I have at this time.
Thank you. Do any of the board members have questions for Ms. Eustace?
I do. Oh, did you say yes?
One of the problems that I perceive as I'm a CPA, so I'm sort of familiar with cash.
I'm sorry, could you speak up a little bit?
Being a CPA, I'm somewhat familiar with cash transactions and recording them. How do you propose to handle your cash considering the problems that you have on a federal level?
Sure. So Without going into too much detail, to not compromise security, we do have a relationship with a bank. So we are able to have secured cash pickups at our locations. So while we are a cash-only business, we are regularly having a secured delivery vehicle come and pick up that cash.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Can we go back to the slide? Is this also what you call the medicine room, actually where the patient sales take place?
That's correct.
Okay, I was confused by that. Sorry, I jotted down a couple of questions from your write-up. 24-hour surveillance is based on cameras, 30 cameras?
Yes.
Okay. It says that your security needs to prevent individuals from under 18 years of age from entering the facility unless they are accompanied by either the patient or they are accompanied by a parent, guardian, or caregiver.
Yes.
Correct? Okay. You mentioned that they have to present a Pennsylvania validated ID, and you also keep a logbook of everyone who comes in and out of your facility, correct?
Yes, that's correct. It has to be a government-issued ID, so we also accept a passport in addition to their patient card. But yes, and I'm sorry, we do. If you are considered a visitor on our property, if you're a patient or a caregiver, then all of your data is going into the Department of Health's system, which they can access at any time. If you are accompanying a patient, we have to collect your ID and log you in a visitor log.
Okay. I just remembered one other thing about the medicine room. You mentioned 3 to 5 patients per hour. So I wonder about confidentiality and privacy. Do you have a process for ensuring that people, just that room that you showed had multiple tabletops that look like to have those discussions?
That's correct. So we have a private consultation room. So the patient can meet with our medical professional in a private consultation room. And then we do have enough distance between the point of sale stations to ensure that we're not disclosing any private information about the patient.
Is the private consultation listed on here yet?
It should be. It's not.
Okay, so it would be maybe off the side of the medicinal room?
Yeah, it's typically either off of the waiting room or off of the sales floor.
Okay. Thank you. I have one more question. Can someone explain to me the 1,000-foot buffer? Is that simply because of the school, the buffer around it has to be 1,000 feet, not including the school or daycare? That's correct. That's the only reason for that term, okay? And then the last one I had was, I was looking at the Franklin Bioscience Penn LLC Attachment A dispensary application scoring, and I noted in a number of instances what I would consider essentially C+ grades.
Okay.
And I have a question for you on a couple of these. At a maximum point, maybe you can describe what this process is first, so I have context for how it's graded.
Sure. So during the application phase, the Commonwealth allows for applicants to answer a series of questions in an application form. So we submitted, our application was around 700 pages. Making sure that we're answering all of the questions the Department of Health has to ultimately identify who is a qualified operator.
Okay. So, for example, employee qualifications, description of duties, and training, it was 38.4 out of a 50 maximum. Another one was, which I felt was also rated pretty low, but again, I don't have the context. Transportation of medical marijuana, maximum points for that section was 25, and it showed up as 17.2 as the applicant score. Labeling of medical marijuana also was a 25-point maximum, but you guys scored 15.8. Record keeping out of 50 was 17.2. Those are a little bit concerning to me, again, without knowing the context. So could you provide some context to help us understand?
These are areas where I would think you'd have the most concern about hitting the high mark on the maximum.
And we've actually, since that application, applied again for permits and scored much higher on those areas, so we were able to improve those areas. We also work very closely with the Department of Health to ensure that we are meeting all of their standards, and our company wishes to exceed those standards. So from a staffing and training perspective, I'm extremely confident in saying that all of those procedures have improved substantially. I've personally been operating state licensed medical marijuana dispensaries for over 7 years now, so that was an expertise that I was able to offer to Franklin Bioscience when I joined after this initial application was submitted. So those processes have certainly improved. As far as labeling is concerned, we did draw a lot of our experience from other states with labeling. However, since we've been able to work with the Department of Health to improve all of those processes as well, and we've been deficiency-free with any of their inspections. The other was secure delivery, I believe that you...
Transportation of medical marijuana, yes.
So when we applied, we were actually applying for, was that the grow with this application? This was this. So we don't transport any of our medical marijuana, which I think would improve and increase that score substantially. We receive all of our deliveries from state licensed grows. So that is not something that we actually have to do ourselves. But with that, we've worked with the grower processors and secured delivery companies to ensure that not only are our employees safe during those transactions, but that we're doing everything from a compliance standpoint as well.
So the information that you submitted, this is the 2017 application, is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, so since then you've had additional submissions. Would you have something comparable to this?
We do.
Updated about, okay, if you could send that to us, that would be very helpful.
Sure.
Thank you.
And can I ask a clarifying question on that? So these scores are based on an application where you were describing how, if you were issued the permit, you intend to operate. Is that correct?
Thank you.
It's
Yes.
not based on an actual operation where, you know, it's physically open already. It was, hey, if, you know, here's how we intend to operate. And I think that's where you're saying that based on some feedback or meetings or whatnot, or experiences from other facilities, you've now, you believe, improved that to then improve your score. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
And another question is, assume that you already have your permit from the state, but assume that you get the conditional use approval and whatever other permits you need, and you're able to operate at this facility. Am I correct in stating that the Department of Health has to come and inspect to make sure that you're in compliance with all state regulations before you're allowed to open the door for business?
Yes, you're correct.
I'm sure that's clear.
Thank you.
And a follow-up, follow-up to this. How often then do you have those inspections year after year?
Well, they're random. Yes, so unfortunately I can't give you a fair answer for that.
That's a good answer, though.
we've had multiples already.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
And I also have a couple questions. You mentioned you see 3 to 5 patients an hour. On average, how much time do you spend with each patient?
On average, our transaction speed is about 20 minutes. Sometimes much shorter, sometimes longer, depending on the patient's need.
And are the appointments pre-scheduled to come in?
We have both. So we have consultation appointments that we book, and if they don't need to meet with the pharmacist, then they can come in on a walk-in basis. And if they do come in on a walk-in basis and want to meet with one of our pharmacists, assuming they don't have something already scheduled, we'll take the walk-in as well. Of course.
On Exhibit 810, which would be the drive-in, can the 2 workers in the truck, one stays, one gets out, can they get into the building without going outside?
Yes. Yes, so there's an entry into our building once you're inside. You're welcome.
Is it accurate that it's quality control they walk through to get in?
We do refer to it as quality control, yes. So it's a man trap sally port of sorts. So one door will not open unless the other door is closed.
Just a quick question, just curious. I see the maximum score for the Schedule A is 1,000. Do you know what the minimum score is?
I'm sorry.
The attachment A, part of the application.
Oh.
The chairman was talking about.
I don't.
Would be 0, wouldn't it, if you got...
Well, I meant the minimal passes question.
Oh, I think can you explain the ranking maybe? That would be
Yeah,
helpful.
sure. So it wasn't necessarily on a pass-fail. All of the applicants submitted their application, and then the highest scorers were awarded the permits. So I think that's a
But
good
within
question.
a certain geographic region, they were allocated a certain number of dispensary permits per region. I think there's 7 regions in the state. Is that right?
Mhm.
6,
So
okay.
based on these scores, it was a competitive process.
Yeah.
You actually, I hate to see the worst. Okay. Without getting into security too much in
Sure.
detail, one of my questions would be, what is your protocol, what is your process for folks that are illegally trying to get something? When you suspect that someone's giving you something like a false identification or something along those lines?
So it's going to depend on the severity of the incident. We do have a refusal form that we issue if they're ever refused service, and we're recording their name, their medical marijuana or caregiver card number, the date, who they dealt with. And if there's ever any type of substantial issue, we're notifying the Department of Health. We'd be notifying local law enforcement as well if it ever escalates to that type of level. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess if you feel truly that it's an attempt to possess a controlled substance, or I'm assuming the protocol is to contact local police.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Of course.
Anybody else on the board?
I have one more question about security. Can you give us some perspective or context in terms of how safe your other existing facilities have been already?
Sure, we've had no issues at any of our other facilities.
And how many facilities in total do you have?
So we are currently operating 2, but we will be opening 12 in the Commonwealth.
I was expecting other states, though. You're also in other states, aren't you?
We aren't doing dispensaries currently in other states. In Nevada, we have cultivation and production. In Colorado, we have production. And then my background was in Arizona with state licensed medical marijuana dispensaries.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so we're going to turn it over to the parties. Mr. Campanile, at this time, it's appropriate for you to ask questions of this witness based on the testimony she provided.
Yes. You know that we have a common tradition in Goshen, East Goshen, West Goshen, beautiful family-oriented. It's called the Goshen Fair. Would you consider that where kids going to be around? That's like a public school to me. That is like something sacred. Our beloved children will be going to these fairs and transport them all around there and have to look at this building. And then they'll ask a question what it is. I feel your building should be placed somewhere else, away from our little community. And that's how I feel about this. Plus other things I can get into later too.
This is just questions to this witness.
But
So
how do you
you're not
feel
really
about
asking her a
that?
question, you're stating a position.
Do you feel like the Goshen Fair is not like a school where we have kids come in the summertime and use that ground across the street that's maybe 20 feet away? And they're in a park and why? I think it's, your opinion is that's like a school to you. I mean, it's where children are at. I know we might have a daycare off the street a little bit, maybe 1,500 feet up the road, there's a daycare, maybe a little far up. But 1,000 feet, I don't think it's wise, to use that excuse that there's no children around. I just want to know your opinion.
Well, let me interject this comment. The state has a requirement, and that is what we testified to, that we are in compliance. I don't know if it's necessarily pertinent as to what my client's opinion is with respect to another activity located in close proximity. That, again, it's the state requirement that the state imposed of 1,000 feet separation. We are compliant with that.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, I'm not, the testimony that she provided was to show compliance with the state regulation, and the state regulations will define what a school is. So, any further questions for her based on her testimony?
Well,
You'll be given an opportunity to state your opinion, but right now, it's if you have a question about something she stated.
those areas that you're in, Bucks County and Philadelphia, have a different, like, commercial feel. Do you feel like you're moving into our neighborhood? It's more like a family-oriented neighborhood. Those areas out there, I know. I can go buses out there. I know that whole area. Even in Center City, that's real secular, urban, commercial. Do you feel you can move into our neighborhood and think it's okay? And I'm asking that question. I mean, this is a family neighborhood around here.
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Willard, do you have any questions?
Yeah, security. You have a security guard inside. What are your hours?
Our proposed hours are 9 to 8, Monday through Wednesday. Thank you. 9 to 9, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and 11 to 5 on Sunday.
And off hours, who's going to be monitoring the facility and the nearby area?
We have a 24-hour monitoring company.
Is there going to be any security on site?
When we do not have any staff or employees on site, we do not have security guards on site.
Also, as far as you said 3 to 5 people per hour, and with the hours that you're mentioning, 9 to 9 on 3 of those days, that's a lot of more traffic and, into that area. That's still a lot of people coming and going. Is there any better security that you can provide for the nearby neighbors? And as myself being a business owner who has, where you deal by cash, I have cash and credit cards, how do you make me feel safe with that kind of, medical marijuana coming into the area? I'm looking for a safety issue on my hand because I live within 100 feet. Mr. Wiggins' property and business is a lot closer, because we're neighbors. But I don't feel I'm going to be in a comfortable state with that down there. There's going to be a lot more people checking it out, and there's a bus stop in there. I don't feel safe.
Well, again, I think this is the time for questions, and I understand Ms. Willard's opinion, and I respect it, but as far as this particular witness, we've testified to as to the security that will be in place. That's what's the record.
Also, one other question. If this was, with you guys knowing I'm a resident of East Goshen, why did I only get my letter of this coming into our neighborhood on Friday? And this hearing is on Tuesday. Why wasn't I instructed that you were planning on coming in here, and why wasn't I allowed to come to your first meeting? My letter came on Friday. It's when my
Mr.
letter.
Webb, I don't know if you can speak to who got notices and
The MPC doesn't require us to send notices at all. You're an East Goshen resident, therefore we wouldn't have sent you a notice anyway.
But I'm still within the limits.
First of all, we didn't send you a letter, so I don't know how you received
East
the letter.
Goshen did.
Okay. So our responsibility from the MPC is to post the property and advertise it. That's it. We go one step ahead by notifying our residents that are within 1,000 feet of the subject property. We don't have East Goshen Township records. Just like East Goshen didn't notify our residents when they had proposed development on Ellis Lane by the high school. It's not our obligation to notify East Goshen residents. We go above and beyond what the MPC requires us to do.
And in all fairness though, you're saying that you don't really recognize me as a homeowner there, but yet we share the same police force. East Goshen, West Goshen.
No, you do not, ma'am. Different police
But I
force.
mean, I just think, being that close, just like Mr. Wiggins, I should have been notified a lot sooner than Friday afternoon than East Goshen.
We respect that, but I will tell you that the prior meeting was not a meeting of the Board of Supervisors. The only board that has the jurisdiction to approve this use is this board right now. So you've protected your rights by being recognized as a party tonight. So your voice is being heard, and your rights you've not jeopardized any rights. The other meeting that they spoke about was a planning commission meeting, which is a recommending body of the board. This is the only board that can render a decision. So with that, Mr. Wiggins, do you have any questions for this witness?
Yes. Your survey that said there was no daycare nearby, there's a daycare right next to my office for dogs.
Doesn't.
Here's my real question.
That wasn't a real question?
This is only daycare within town. One of my questions to you would be, the 3 to 5 per hour. What I've read appears it's more like a lot more than that. And my understanding, there's one in Malcolm. And in Malcolm, they're having a parking problem with adjacent businesses already. It won't really affect me. But will you be allowed to park in the shopping center overflow? Have you made arrangements for that? Because how many parking spaces? I think it's only 10 or 11 right now, and you have 4 or 5 employees. That's jammed up already, I believe. So parking is one of the issues.
Mr. Wiggins, let me answer that by saying that the township has adopted a parking requirement for this use.
Correct.
And they mirror the pharmacy use. And it's 3.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet. We are compliant with parking.
But can you answer his question anyway? To say if you are able to park in the parking lot, I'm just curious, for the shopping center, in the event that the 3.5 is insufficient?
I know that the shopping center is located right next door.
Correct.
I don't think there's anything prohibiting someone from parking in the shopping center, visiting the Rite Aid, and then if they happen to visit this facility, could walk over and do so.
But as far as your client's lease, they do not have the right to have their customers park in the parking lot.
Or
Okay.
There are cross-access easements with regard to ingress and egress. I am not aware of any shared parking at this point in time.
Because I think Mr. Walters, who owns the shopping center, could perhaps ask. But I don't think that 3 to 5 is what I understand. I read it's 150 people a day and it's normal. There's a lot more than 3 to 5 now.
But Mr. Wiggins, that's not this entity. That's a different one in Malvern, so it could be different.
Correct, but you can't limit the 3 to 5 patients per hour, especially as marijuana becomes more useful. As I get older and I want it, people get, the older people want it, it's just you're just on the beginning of the use of marijuana medically. So I understand what you're saying. The rules of the township are 3 to 5. I understand all that parking spaces per square foot, but I just think it might be a higher use when we get on.
Yeah, and I think good point, and I appreciate you bringing that. What Mr. Jarrett's point is that at this point in time, we can't hold him to a higher standard. But I think you raise a good point that we need to keep our eye on the use and evaluate if the number of parking spaces that we've dictated for a pharmacy makes sense for this use. So we will keep that in mind.
Based on what I've read, it's a little bit more.
Thank you.
I understand East Goshen told me the same thing. The rules are the rules.
Any further questions of this witness?
No.
Okay, so we will let members of the audience ask a question of the witness for clarification purposes. No, go ahead. Yes.
I had 4 or 5 on.
Can you state your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. Robert Scheller. This is Circle, West Goshen Township.
Can you spell your name for me, please?
Scheller. Okay. On this track, just some questions. On your employees, what type of criminal background do you have employees?
So all of our employees have FBI fingerprints, And we also do a local state criminal report. Those are requirements of the Department of Health to be one of our employees, and we also do our own background checks on our employees.
So you can't hire a convicted felon?
We cannot.
Okay. Night security, you said two things. I know you have outside cameras, and then you said you also hire a service. Is this a mobile service that drives around every once in a while, or?
We contract with a security company, so we have the on-site security guards during all hours of operations, and then we have a 24-hour surveillance company that has access to our cameras inside and outside the facility.
Okay, so they're surveilling 24 outside, okay. And I guess the last question, directed to what you said too, was a hypothetical, if a patient of yours were caught selling your product on the outside and were arrested by the police, is there any procedure to get back to you to then cease your sales to that patient?
Sure. So if somebody is caught doing something against the regulations, then the Department of Health can revoke their patient card or caregiver card, in which case we wouldn't be able to see them in our facility anyway. But we're also willing to work with law enforcement, so any product that is distributed to one of our patients has a label on it. That label can be traced back to our dispensary and also to the patient who purchased the product. You're welcome.
We'll just go over her. Ms. Ford, please.
Margie Sport. Could you just verify, I think you said something about the doctors who write the prescriptions.
Sure.
They're not really prescriptions, right?
They're recommendations.
Yeah, so there's no prescription needed to walk into the dispensary and get marijuana.
So it's not a prescription in the way of going into a pharmacy with a prescription. When you meet with one of the doctors prior to receiving this recommendation to use cannabis, that's how these patients or caregivers are receiving a card. So a patient or a caregiver has to meet with a certified doctor that's been recognized as by the Department of Health to write these recommendations to patients or caregivers, and they have to have a physical card in their possession before they can come into our facility.
So it's just proving that they have one of the 21 diagnoses.
It is, and then we have a shared site, so the recommending doctors can put notes in a patient's profile. So if that patient has any type of upper respiratory issues, for instance, or a predisposition where a particular product wouldn't be beneficial for them, then they can put in the system that they do not recommend a particular product to a patient.
And then I thought I read on the state website that the hours could only be from 8 to 8. So I'm curious why your hours are proposing to be until 9.
There are restrictions on deliveries for the hours.
So the 8 to 8 is for deliveries, not for...
I believe you're referring to the delivery requirements.
Okay. What are your hours in Bristol?
Our hours right now in Bristol are noon to 7 Sunday and Monday, and 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Tuesday through Saturday.
Okay. So the news that I read earlier, 10 to 6, was probably when it first opened, so you've extended your hours since you first opened?
That's correct.
Okay. Is there anything that prohibits you from opening 24 hours a day?
I don't know what exactly would be prohibitive of it, but right now that's not how we operate.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. White?
Those are White, 1001 Woodview Lane, West Goshen. Does Act 16, that Pennsylvania Act that allows the dispensaries to operate, allow dispensing of the form that can produce monitoring effects, and if so, will you be dispensing that form?
Are we talking? I'm sorry? Yeah, I'm not a doctor. I can tell you what the allowable forms are within the program, if that's...
Okay, yes, please.
Okay, so they allow for tinctures, which are sublingual drops. They allow for pills, They allow for cartridges for vaporization. They allow for concentrates for vaporization, and they allow for flour for vaporization.
So these forms may or may not cause a mind-altering effect.
Well, I'm going to object. I think we're getting into medical testimony again. We are applying for medical marijuana dispensary. That medical marijuana is a defined term in your zoning ordinance, and that is the application that is before the Board of Supervisors. If someone chooses to take up issues with the Commonwealth with respect to what they have permitted by law, they are certainly free to do that. That is not part of this application. We are making a specific application for a use permitted by your zoning ordinance. So I would object. Any questions?
Yeah, and I don't think this board has the jurisdiction to get into the details of, I mean, where state law says what forms can be sold through a medical marijuana dispensary.
Okay, maybe that was an unfair question. I apologize. So the physician doesn't need a DEA number to write for this, or I mean, when I write for opioids, I have to provide a DEA number. They don't need that.
Are you asking about our pharmacists in our dispensary?
Yeah.
By the time they come to us, they've already had cannabis approved as a recommendation for them with the Department of Health.
All right. Also, your signage, I was impressed that it will be discreet.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Thank you.
Welcome.
And your staff, is there a protocol for continuing education for training?
Yes, so all of our staff goes through a pretty substantial training. For us, we really pride ourselves on education, and it's a medical facility. So we do have a pretty extensive training that our patients, our patient consultants go through.
Do you have to answer to a state board and complete a certain number of minimum hours for 2 years?
Our pharmacists on staff have to complete a 4-hour CME course. If that answers your question.
And is there limits on refills?
The recommending doctor typically writes what a 30-day supply consists of.
And then you'll provide counseling, home care instructions, written materials.
Yes.
And do you have a method to, I guess why I asked the question about the mind-altering effect is that it is available by state law. You have a way to prevent someone from operating their vehicle after purchasing this, and that's my concern. That's it. Or is that part
I don't know if I can really answer to how we prevent people from operating vehicles.
Well, just as when we write for opioid narcotics,
sure.
You can't operate heavy machinery, you got to get the whole counseling, and again, when somebody leaves my office, I can't, I mean, I don't dispense it, of course, I dispense the prescription. I was just wondering if you had a way that maybe they can have someone to drive them home, or?
Well, there's no consumption on premises, so you can't consume on or around our premises. So patients are instructed to go home and use their medication.
As far as, you may not be required to do this, but I would like to see a perimeter safety with the use of bollards to protect your building and your sidewalks. It may not be required, but it was a comment I'd like to make.
Okay, that's a comment. Any further questions? Mr. Corbo, I think you had raised your hand.
Yeah, my name is Bill Corbo out of 863 Empress Road. First question is a two-edged question, but first part of it is, what were the reasons that attracted you to locate this business in West Goshen Township?
Does Justin want to answer?
Another witness can answer that question, Mr. Corbo, so we'll reserve that to the next witness. They'd like another witness to answer that, so we'll reserve it to when they call in. Do you have another question for this witness that can answer?
No, the other side of the question was, in that context, were there other communities that you considered locating this business to?
John, do you intend to call
I
the
do.
other witness? Okay, so let's...
Again, I want the questions to be limited to the requirements before the board. It's kind of like asking Wawa why they decided to open a convenience store there.
Yeah, I mean, it might be interesting, but it's not really relevant to this board's consideration because the board has already made a legislative decision that a medical marijuana dispensary is appropriate in the C5 district. So they're permitted by law to make this request to put it in this location. So, okay, any further questions for this witness? Anybody else in the audience? We have a full agenda beyond just this hearing, so please state your name and spell it for the court reporter.
ABBAS, last name RAHBARI, 1613 Manley Road, Westchester, PA. Madam, you stated that you have had no issue in your other locations. Is it your testimony there has been zero issue with respect to police calls, or interaction with the police department as it relates to either stealing, theft, or any other matter that would bring the police department to your location? Again, I'm stating that in the event somebody wants to FOIA those requests from the police department, are you still standing by your statement that there has been zero issue with the police department? Thank you.
So we have hit our panic buttons on accident. We test our panic buttons on a monthly basis, and our panic buttons have been pressed accidentally by our staff, which case the police do respond. If your question is, have we had to escalate any type of issue with theft with any of our patients? No, we have not.
Okay, and there was one other person.
Hi, yes, Ashley Gagne, Gagne. I just had a couple questions, and it's kind of piggybacking off of what Mr. White was asking. So you said that people aren't allowed to actually use the product on site.
Correct.
And I'm kind of trying to wrap my head around, so for example, and I know that you're totally different than a bar, for example, right, where someone goes and they get a drink, which alters their state of mind and not alters their ability to drive a car. But if they're overserved, for example, like at a bar, and they're pulled over on the way home, or they hit somebody, and the police look into it and they find out they left that establishment and were overserved, how does that? I mean, can you answer me from a point of just a business of how you do take responsibility if something like that were to occur? What is your role within that situation, hypothetically? And I don't know if you've been in that situation before.
Let me interject this point before you answer that question. I'd like the public to understand this is very synonymous to a pharmacy. And just as there's nothing to prohibit someone from getting a full prescription for a month of OxyContin, and walking outside of that pharmacy and ingesting a 30-day supply of OxyContin, and then operating a motor vehicle. So I'd like the board to keep in mind that this is exactly the same type of use. We are applying for the use that has been permitted by state law, and this zoning application is with specific direction of the dispensary use as you permit. So I understand the question. Blythe, I don't know if you can answer it, but I'd like the public to please keep that in mind when they consider this use. Are you able to answer the question? Or not really?
No, I mean, I think you actually answered the question for me.
But I actually have a follow-up to that. But this dispensary is not actually a pharmacy, correct? It's not.
It's recognized as a use under Pennsylvania state law, different than a pharmacy.
So it's
under
not a
zoning.
So it's not the same as a pharmacy.
But under the state law, this township had, and all municipalities in the Commonwealth had to treat dispensaries similarly.
I understand.
Yeah.
No, I totally understand what you're saying. Just from, I'm trying to kind of think of everything that could affect our actual community. And the one last question that I had was, you talked about these physicians that were licensed by the Department of Health to write, to grant people these cards.
They've been certified by the Department of Health, yes.
They've been certified by the Department of Health. Are these physicians on site, like giving out cards?
No.
Okay, so the physicians that are on site are the pharmacists, or?
We have pharmacists on site. We're required to have medical professionals on site to have conversations and consultations with the patients and caregivers. But they are not allowed to write any recommendations. They are not certified to write recommendations.
So someone can't walk in and say, my back hurts, can you give me a card? Can I get the product and can I leave?
No.
That doesn't happen?
No.
Okay.
And back hurting is not one of the 21 diseases that we're
I
allowed.
don't even know what the 21 are. Was that provided yet, or?
It's in the state law.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Okay, we really need to move forward. John, you have a question?
I have a question.
Can you state your name for the board reporter?
John Beswick, building official at West Goshen Township. I probably live within 2,000 feet of this building. I'm wondering, right now it's with the laws and everything, it's for medical purposes. Distribution is basically like a pharmaceutical type situation. What happens if the laws change to recreational, and what's your policy on that? Will we have a case where we have anything township-wise that would require them to come back in for some type of condition for that?
We have no idea. We have no idea what the new state law would say. We have no idea what power it will give to a municipality such as West Goshen Township to address it. So I don't think it's a fair question because it's a hypothetical that we can't answer. And it will be constrained. I will tell you that the municipality will be constrained by what the state, how they dictate how it can be allowed. So we can't, and I don't think it's an appropriate condition for this board to fantasize or hypothesize what the state ultimately may do and then restrict this user. I don't think we're given that power under state law. So if we can, I'd like to move to the next witness. I know the board has a full agenda on the regular board meeting. So do you have another witness, Mr. Jaros?
We are going to move to Mr. Daly.
Do you want to just, yeah, that's fine. Why don't you do that? Mr. Daly.
Thank you.
And all the witnesses have already been sworn, so please proceed.
Mr. Craig, if you could please put up exhibits A7, please. Chris, while he's doing that, your full name and current business address.
My name is Christopher Daly, and my business address is 1250 Wrights Lane, Westchester, PA 19380.
And are you employed, and if so, by whom?
I am by D.L. Howe and Associates.
And are you a registered engineer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and have you been accepted as such by this board or any boards in nearby municipalities?
I have been for other boards.
I would offer Mr. Daly as an expert civil engineer. The CV is in our packet of exhibits marked as Exhibit A13.
And I would recommend that the board accept him as an expert civil engineer. Objection?
Good.
Okay.
Chris, you are the civil engineer on this team with regard to the property and its compliance with conditional use requirements for the proposed use, are you not?
That is correct.
I'd like you to identify certain facts with regard to the property. First, the property comprises just about an acre in the northwest corner of Westchester Pike and Ellis Lane in the township. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
The property is located within the C5 General Highway Commercial District of the township, correct?
Yes.
And as such, a medical marijuana dispensary is permitted by conditional use in this district under Section 8432M10, correct?
It is.
And did you prepare a conditional use plan essentially consisting of an aerial photograph and demonstrating certain setbacks of the lot we marked as Exhibit A7?
Yes, I did.
Now, using A7, Chris, which is up on the board, and the board has smaller copies, can you please just go through the required area and bulk requirements and state for the record whether or not we're in compliance or if we are non-conforming with respect to any of those requirements?
Yes, I can. So the required minimum lot size is 20,000 square feet. We are in compliance at about 46,000 square feet. The minimum lot width at the building line is required to be 300 feet. We are actually in a non-conforming condition, having a 267-foot width at the building line. The required lot width at the right-of-way line is 125 feet. We have 302 feet, which is in compliance. The maximum lot coverage requirement is 30%. We are providing about 6%, which is in compliance. The front yard building setback is required to be 40 feet. We are actually not in compliance along Ellis Lane, and our setback is 28 feet. The minimum side yard setback requirement is 15 feet. We are in compliance at 63 feet. The minimum rear yard is not applicable since we are a corner lot. The minimum green area is required to be 20%. We are in compliance at about 67%. The maximum building height requirement is 40 feet. We are in compliance at less than 40 feet. The maximum paved surface area is required to be 55%, and we are in compliance at 27.4%. And the parking area setback is required to be 20 feet, and we are not in compliance because we are at 0, pretty much.
So that would be a non-conformity as well.
Correct.
And the parking for this essentially uses the pharmacy parking lot requirement, does it not?
Yes.
And if so, what is that requirement? Are we in compliance?
It is 3.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet of gross floor area, and we are in compliance.
Now, you've heard testimony with respect to what the client proposes as far as refurbishing the interior of the building for patient access. You're also familiar with what the client proposes with regard to the conversion drive-through portion of the bank and how that will function as a secure delivery port, correct?
Yes.
In doing any of those additions or modifications, does the client propose any additional impervious coverage, either building conversion or additional macadam?
No.
That being the case, have you checked with the township, and are we proposing any additional stormwater management controls if they would even be needed?
We are not.
And in fact, they would not be needed because there's no additional impervious coverage, correct?
Correct.
Existing ingress and egress will be maintained as the status quo, will it not?
Yes, it will.
As currently depicted on Exhibit A7?
Yes, that is correct.
And I assume lighting essentially will remain status quo as well. Is that your understanding?
Yes, it will.
As far as traffic controls, is it the applicant's position that this medical marijuana dispensary use essentially will function very similar from a traffic perspective as the bank branch that preceded it? As such, you heard testimony from the applicant, 3 to 5 patients approximately per hour, correct?
Yes.
And are you familiar with the conditional use standards within the township zoning ordinance?
I am.
And that being the case, do you have an opinion as to whether or not this application as testified to this evening meets the specific objective standards of the zoning ordinance in that respect?
I believe that it does.
Those are all the questions I have for Mr. Taylor.
Everybody at the board?
I have one question. You said the ingress to egress would be the same. And I just need, I'm asking a question about what looks like another driveway that would enter into the secure area. Right here right now, it's still macadam.
Yeah, so you're referring to the drive-through lane?
Yes.
Yes, that's only going to be used for deliveries, for the vehicles that are making
But you
deliveries.
still have an opening to Ellis Lane, so how do you prevent others from coming up from there?
It's just a one-way road.
It says that on the certificate.
And it's a very fair question. And once the drive-through facility is improved to the condition that was testified to, that will not be used by patrons, only deliveries.
Okay, thank you.
Will there be signage that will indicate that?
Yes.
Is that driveway wide enough to have a series of parking spaces beside it for the people that work there?
The one-way drive out? No.
It's, what, a 12-foot?
Yeah, I believe it's about 12 feet.
It's very narrow. One way.
Well, I mean, nobody other than a delivery vehicle would even be going into the building.
Correct.
Because it's a secure delivery site, so nobody could get in there.
Yes.
To be able to then come out the other side.
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Anybody else on the board have a question for Mr. Daly? Okay. So these are questions specific to Mr. Daly, who really spoke to the lot. Let's go back. Mr. Campanile, questions for this witness? Any questions from what he testified about?
I mean, he still wondering, I,
Okay, you don't have to, I'm just making sure you have an opportunity. Ms. Willard?
No.
Okay, and Mr.
The
Wiggins?
building pretty much is the same, so.
Okay. Mr. Wiggins? No? Okay. And again, anybody in the audience, we hope no questions because it was fairly limited. Ms. Swarton, specific to his testimony.
Well, there's a big sign out front. Is that going to remain?
I don't know.
Is it a sign for the bank? Is it a sign for the bank?
Yes.
Okay. Do any of your witnesses know if that sign's coming
No,
down?
but I can state on behalf of the applicant, if there is an existing sign, we will have to, we may plan to utilize that sign. We will have to file a sign permit application for any signage related to the facility. We will address that at that time.
And then when you change the use from a bank to a pharmacy, drugstore, the board can require the applicant to meet the setbacks, correct? It's not like an automatic, you don't get grandfathered in, just because the parking.
It depends on the sign regulations and it depends on if they use the existing structure.
Well,
So
I'm
they,
talking about like parking spaces as well. So the parking
No.
spaces don't need.
it depends on how the area involved regulations are written. If they're written specific to the C5 district, this lot exists and the building exists. And so those are grandfathered conditions. Okay, any other questions for Mr. Daly? Dr. White?
So I guess, for Margie, the nonconformity of the setback of Ellis Lane does not have to be corrected.
That's correct. Okay, so any other questions? Doesn't look like it. Any other witnesses?
That essentially completes the applicant's case. I would present the evidence applicant's exhibits 8-1 through 8-13.
Okay, so at this point in time, it's appropriate if the parties, we've heard a lot of you when you were asking questions, you really made statements, but I'm going to give you a quick opportunity if you have another statement to make for the board to consider. Mr. Campanile, you're first.
well, when I realized this was going to happen to our community, I look at it this way. We've been there a long time. Like I said, it's a family neighborhood. We got kids all over the Goshen Fair. It's a beautiful neighborhood. I'm worried about the influx of traffic, people that don't have good intentions come out here and they're fraudulently getting material with some kind of doctors giving them a signature. They don't really need it. And there's some kind of loopholes in that, I guess, everywhere in life. And I always consider marijuana to be a gateway drug to other drugs, if it's misused. That's what I'm worried about. I know marijuana, the hemp and all that stuff, it's been in history, but in our contemporary world, it is a gateway drug to other drugs. And a lot of these young people in our neighborhood are going to look at it and copy that mentality and go into other areas of misuse. That's why I'm here.
Thank you for your comments. Ms. Willard?
The only thing is, as I stated earlier, I'm a little concerned about the safety in that area. You know, as Bob was saying, you know, I know there's a bus stop. People can come up on the buses, check it out, try to break in. I understood all the stuff they were saying about security, but still, it doesn't stop people, and still, you're going to have people who are going to want to break in and get some of the marijuana medication. I just don't feel secure anymore. It's a very quiet neighborhood, and I just think it's going to become unsafe.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Wiggins?
Well, I'm aware that the decision is based on law, I understand that. And what you make, the decision you make is based on the rules, I understand the federal law. Does that limit, you may not be able to answer, but limit, you can't be near
Daycare.
Daycare. Does that limit the use of the firehouse property for future development as a daycare? Let's say somebody, I've been approached to have a daycare in my place a couple times. I was, maybe next year. Does that limit my use of my property? If it does, then you're restricting my use and devaluing my property. And the second question would be, if I have a problem with parking, do I call West Goshen or East Goshen? Who do I call?
If you have a problem with parking based on this use, you would call West Goshen.
Even though the parking is East Goshen.
Well, I still think,
But
because
you
you're,
don't have
if you,
jurisdiction in these Goshen.
Mr. Wiggins, let me answer. If you believe that your problem is caused from a use in West Goshen, you should contact the gentleman at the end of the aisle over there, Mr. Webb, if it's a zoning use. If you think that the problem's coming from somebody in East Goshen, you call East Goshen.
Parking. Yeah, it's challenging for me.
Yeah, so I think you would call West
And
Goshen.
you limited my future use of my property.
I don't know the answer to that, but
So
I,
therefore, do I have a case against West Goshen?
no, you don't have a case against West Goshen. I don't know the answer to your question.
Mr. Wynn, you limited my future use, and the firehouse as well. You limited the use of this daycare facility for any future development on my side of the road.
I don't know the answer to the question. I don't know once they have a permit, if based at the time that they get the permit, there's not a daycare. You need to let me answer the question. You keep interrupting. I don't know the law on whether once they get the permit, with the condition that there is no school or daycare within 1,000 feet, if I think they have to annually renew the permit. Am I correct on that? I don't know if every time they do that, if they then have to verify again that they're not within 1,000 feet. I don't know the answer to that. But that's not something that this board has jurisdiction over.
Oh, I understand that. It's just
So,
something I'm trying to figure out in my head.
Yeah. Okay. Nothing further from the parties. It's appropriate now to open it up to just general comments, and we're going to try to limit this in time again because it's 8:35 and they have another meeting with a packed agenda. So if you have a statement that the board hasn't already heard, you're given a quick opportunity to provide a statement. Sir.
BoS Ribery, same last name and same address. Given the history, what I have encountered with the West Goshen Police Department and West Goshen Township and level of incompetence with respect to notice, with respect to parking, things that I see, good luck. Thank you.
Anybody else? Ms. Ford.
I'm not opposed to the applicant. I'm not opposed to having medical marijuana dispensary in the township. I'm opposed to the process. This is the application that was before the board, the planning commission the other night. It consisted of 3 pages. The cover letter, the application, and this map. So the planning commission voted 7-2 based off these 3 items only. I had this document, which seemed to create a lot of interest on your behalf. When I attempted to ask questions on here that were similar to the board's, that is when I was told I was not allowed to ask questions because this information was not in front of the planning commission. The process to get here is just, it's an embarrassment to government, to democracy.
Ms. Ford, let me make a comment on it though, because this board doesn't give the permits. That's the Department of Health. And so all they had to demonstrate is that they have a permit from the Commonwealth. So it would not have been appropriate for the Planning Commission to talk about their permit. I mean, once they demonstrate they have the permit, that's all the township can do.
Right, but they oftentimes base part of their decision on the recommendation from the planning commission. And I just want
But the planning commission be looking at as land use and the impact upon land, not on whether they have a permit. They had to have a permit to be able to come to this stage of the game.
Okay, so a couple of comments. That parcel is located by the same, or owned by the same trust as the shopping center.
No, it is not.
I have that information. I did inquire with the Rite Aid and the pizza shop today, yesterday. All those businesses in that shopping center was totally unaware of this application. So I don't know how many, maybe Mr. Webb, how many parties were actually notified?
Well, Ms. Ford, your information was wrong. The parcel is owned by a separate entity. Brandon Domini actually owns the shopping center, which they were notified. It's our responsibility to notify the property owner, which we did. We also posted the property in accordance with the MPC. Like I've said before, this township goes above and beyond in notifying residents by notifying folks within 1,000 feet of the subject property. We are not required to do that by law. We are only required to post the property and advertise it in the newspaper. That's all we were required to do, the notification purpose. Brandon Laney was notified. They had never contacted me, nor are they here this evening.
I would like to make a comment. I went to the dispensary today in Malvern. I was there for probably 3 to 5 minutes, and within those 3 to 5 minutes that I was allowed in the vestibule, there were probably 7 to 8 customers that did come in, so they are very busy uses. I just ask that put the conditions on the approval if you're going to approve this. We don't have any regulations regarding marijuana dispensaries.
Nor can we.
Nor can we.
Nor
It's a
can we.
state law.
Certainly we can.
No, we can't.
We cannot.
We have to treat them the way we treat pharmacies. So if we have appropriate conditions for pharmacies, which our ordinance calls out specific things about the size, those would be the types of conditions we could put.
So the next applicant, because there is another marijuana company with the same address as what's on this application. So I just fear that there's going to be another application next week, and it might want to go into a building the size of a pharmacy. So pharmacies are allowed to occupy space of up to 15,000 square feet. Obviously, I think personally that we should limit. We're limiting signs. Our next agenda item, we're going to have regulations on political signs. Why on earth do we not have regulations on marijuana dispensaries?
Because the state law doesn't allow us to.
I believe the applicant did not set up their business in another township because that township did take proactive measures and put some restrictions.
It's not to say that it's lawful.
I can tell them that East Goshen was cooperative.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, this is the time to present something to the board. It's not for interaction between the audience. Anybody else in the audience wants to make a quick statement, please proceed.
Ashley Gagne again. I just want to say for the record that I agree with Margie, and I think that the means by which the information was distributed to the residents was absolutely insufficient. I know that you're saying, Mr. Webb, that you followed what you were only required to do and even went beyond to put it in the paper or whatever it is that you did. But as a resident, as a taxpayer here, I feel that actually a lot of people still probably don't know that this is going in. I feel that if the notice is put up and now we're having a meeting about it, that's not a sufficient amount of time to discuss these issues. It has nothing to do with the business that's going in. It has nothing to do with my views about the business that's going in. It has everything to do with the way that it's handled, the manner through which our citizens, our residents get information. You go to the West Goshen website, there should have been a notice on the homepage of the website about this meeting. There should be something that can reach people in a quicker, faster way, especially about such important issues. And I respect you, Ms. Camp, but you're giving us time, but this is a big issue. And this is the only chance that a lot of people get to come to these meetings and voice their concerns. So that's all I wanted to say.
I have one last comment. This is the main one. The leasing, could you check the first and the last page of the lease that's in your packet and make sure that the applicant is authorized under the lease to exercise the rights of the landowner, because that's a requirement.
There's a representative of the landowner here this evening. You want to identify yourself?
Police Fine, F-E-I-N. I worked with the landowner, Alan Hutzik, and he is perfectly aware of the use.
The lease, according to the law, the lease says that the applicant has the authority to exercise the same rights as a landowner. And I just want to make sure that what's in your packet, the first and the last page, since you weren't provided with the entire lease, we need to make sure that the applicant, according to law, can exercise the rights of the landowner. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anything further? So the board, and I just want to make a point that when the board receives a conditional use application, the state law requires that they hold a public hearing within 60 days. So there is some time constraint to be able to hold the hearing. And if they don't hold the hearing within 60 days, then there's a deemed approval. And then they don't even have to come to a hearing. So that's part of the reason why there's, I wouldn't say a rush, but part of the reason that they are constrained, they can't string it out forever. I just want to make sure people understand that. Under the law, now that the evidentiary portion of the hearing is closed, the board has 45 days to render a decision, and they can do that. They have to do it at a public meeting. So I'm going to turn it over. We can go off the record, and the board can discuss if they'd like to deliberate on this at a future time, or if you feel appropriate to render a decision tonight. We can go off the record for right now.
Objection, this is a public meeting. What is this?
Sir, I'm allowed to deliberate with a client.
This is a public meeting,
It is a
man.
public meeting, and under the law,
I
they're
object to
my
that.
client. You can object all you want.
I just want to be placed on the record. This is a public
It's
meeting.
not on the record. This
No.
isn't on the record.
There are witnesses here.
Back on the record, please. The board is going to take the time that the law provides, and we will come back to a public meeting within 45 days to render a decision. Typically, what we do is I prepare a draft decision and circulate it to the board. They provide me comments, and then, as I said, it will be on an agenda at a future public meeting. So with that, the hearing is closed. Mr. Webb.
Ms. Camp, just so that we have the members who became parties, that they would see me so I can get your information, so that we have the party status.
Yeah, I wrote it down. I have their addresses. So
May I add this to the record? My request to be a party.
your request to be a party is part of the record, ma'am. It is part. This is a transcribed hearing, so you don't need anything written for that. Okay, so thank you, and the record will be closed, and we're going to go into the next meeting.
We're actually going to take a break.
Okay, thank you.
Take a break.
Good, bud.